system that works, that's generous, but is controlled. Shutting down the border with our third largest trading partner would have a pretty massive impact, not just in actual trade, but in the psychological damage it'll do. But I think there's a lot of other ways that we can handle this.
We have Fox team coverage on this. Jeff Paul is following the situation at the border from our West Coast newsroom. But we begin with Ellison Barber, who's reporting from West Palm Beach near the president's home at Mar-a-Lago. Ellison.
Good evening, Rick. Yeah, President Trump is not backing away from his threats to shut down the U.S.-Mexico border, even though some members of his own party say it would be a bad idea. In a new tweet, President Trump said, quote, Mexico must use its very strong immigration laws to stop the many thousands of people trying to get into the USA. Our detention areas are maxed out, and we will take no more illegals. Next step is to close the border. President Trump has threatened to close the southern border in the past, but he never actually did it. He also never set any sort of time frame for when he potentially would shut it down. He talked about it just before the government shutdown in December. But yesterday, he offered a time frame saying it could happen next week.
If they don't stop them, we're closing the border. They'll close it, and we'll keep it closed for a long time. I'm not playing games. Mexico has to stop it. They have people coming right through Mexico. There's a very good likelihood that I'll be closing the border next week, and that'll be just fine with me.
Senator Dianne Feinstein says the president needs to stop with what she called ridiculous threats and manufactured crises at the border. In a statement, the senior senator from California said Mexico is the United States' third biggest trading partner, accounting for more than $1.6 billion in two-way trade each day. If the president shuts the border down, even for a short period of time, trade would crash to a screeching halt. Border Patrol says the U.S. immigration system is at a breaking point, and many of the migrants are families coming from Central America. President Trump has previously threatened to cut aid to the so-called Northern Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Yesterday, Mr. Trump said he did.
We have right now two big caravans coming up from Guatemala. I've ended payments to Guatemala, to Honduras, and to El Salvador. Oh, no money goes there anymore. We were giving them $500 million. We're giving them tremendous aid. We stopped payment to Honduras, to Guatemala, and to El Salvador. We were paying them tremendous amounts of money, and we're not paying them anymore because they haven't done a thing for us. They set up these caravans.
A president shutting down the southern border is rare but not unprecedented. In 1963, after President Kennedy was assassinated, President Johnson and the U.S. Immigration Services temporarily shut down the southern border, stopping people coming and going from the country to try and find Kennedy's killer. But one thing important there is that Mexico was on board with that. They issued orders of their own as well. Here in this situation with this latest threat, Mexico is not on board with it. Today, many people are questioning the legality of potentially closing all of the U.S.-Mexico border, as well as having questions about what that might entail. Would things like air travel be included? How would it impact American citizens who are abroad? So far, President Trump has not offered any additional details on that, and neither has the White House. Rick?
Ellison Barber in West Palm Beach. Ellison, thank you. The president's threat to close crossings could have a major impact on local economies. Cities and towns near the U.S.-Mexican border are bracing for the potential effects, as some Democrats now acknowledge the situation at the border needs to be addressed somehow.
By anyone's definition, by any measure, right now we have a crisis at our southern border. According to the commissioner of CBP, there were 4,000 apprehensions in one day alone this past week, and we're on pace for 100,000 apprehensions on our southern border this month. That is by far a greater number than anything I saw on my watch.
Jeff Paul is in our West Coast Bureau with more on this. Jeff?
Rick, this could compromise the $1.7 billion a day we trade with Mexico. According to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the group also says it would be, quote, an unmitigated economic debacle that could threaten up to 5 million American jobs. Now, the real impacts could be felt in places like the supermarket, where some of the produce often comes directly from Mexico. Those who rely on being able to travel between both countries say the results of a closure could be devastating, especially in border communities from San Diego all the way to South Texas.
We rely on the produce to come in, be offloaded, and be sold. And if there's no produce here, there's no orders coming in, and there's no jobs. And this would devastate this economy here.
Now, this is all happening after Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen asked all DHS agencies for volunteers to go to the border and Congress for emergency funding. Border Patrol says a surge in migrant families trying to illegally get into the U.S. is giving them no choice but to directly release many of them. Agents say they could hit the 100,000 arrests in March, the highest monthly total in a decade. But in California, where arrests at its border are up nearly 700% in the last 6 months, Governor Gavin Newsom blames the White House.
This is the federal government's responsibility. The Trump administration has completely abandoned its responsibility. These are legal asylum seekers, being dumped at the bus shelters, dumped in the street while people are circling.
In his first international trip as governor, Newsom plans to visit Central America next month to learn about immigration and its problems firsthand on the ground. In regards to the president talking about closing the border, Mexico's foreign secretary wrote on Twitter, Mexico doesn't act based on threats, and also saying Mexico is the best neighbor the U.S. could have. Rick?
Up 700%. Jeff Paul in Los Angeles. Jeff, thank you. Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke set to hold his second of 3 rallies today across Texas, officially kicking off his grassroots campaign in his hometown of El Paso earlier today, hoping to boost support for his campaign in a growing field of 2020 contenders. Claudia Cowan is live in El Paso. Claudia.
Good evening, Rick. That's right. The former Texas congressman fired up the crowd of more than 1,000 people who gathered here in downtown El Paso. And for about 45 minutes, he touched on familiar themes like the need to battle climate change and fight for universal health care. He also called for comprehensive immigration reform.
If we are really serious about security, we have a golden opportunity, Republicans, independents, Democrats alike, to work on comprehensive immigration reform, to rewrite this country's immigration laws in our own image, with our own values, and in the best traditions of the United States of America.
And it was a busy day for some of the other declared Democrats running for president. In Iowa, the state's farmers union organized a forum to hear from 5 contenders, including Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, and Julian Castro, while Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard made her first visit as a candidate to Los Angeles. A couple of recent polls show all those presidential hopefuls behind O'Rourke, and he is either third or tied for third behind Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. And tonight, the former vice president is fending off allegations that he kissed a Nevada political candidate on the back of her head at an event in 2014. Former Nevada State Representative Lucy Flores detailing the alleged encounter in an article published in New York Magazine. Biden says he doesn't remember the incident and had no idea that Flores felt uncomfortable. Already widely considered the frontrunner among Democrats, Biden is expected to officially declare his run for president in the next few weeks. Rick.
Claudia Cowan in El Paso. Claudia, thank you. Obamacare also back in the headlines, with the Trump administration ramping up its push to dismantle the controversial health care plan. The Justice Department has announced its support for a court ruling that says the entire law should be struck down. The move has divided Republicans and angered Democrats.
We had in the ACA 20 million more people that had access to health insurance. I can tell you, as an employer who was paying for health insurance, I saw that cost curve begin to bend. It wasn't perfect, but I saw it begin to bend. What we are now doing is allowing the ACA to be whittled away at the end, and the Justice Department is not defending the laws of the United States. This is a first in our history. The Justice Department is not supposed to be partisan. They are supposed to be defending the laws of the United States.
Ray Bogan has more on this.
Rick, good evening. It was a big week for President Trump's health care policy. First, in the courts, federal judges ruled against the administration in multiple suits. That includes striking down Medicaid work requirements. The administration also announced they would no longer defend the Affordable Care Act in court, saying they agree with the Texas court ruling that it's unconstitutional. The president received some criticism from his own party. Senator Susan Collins said she was vehemently against the administration's actions.
If the administration is opposed to the ACA and clearly clearly there are provisions of the law that do need to be fixed. The answer is for the administration to work with Congress.
Now, the president wants to develop new legislation.
And we're going to have pre-existing conditions, and we'll have a much lower deductible. So, and I've been saying it, the Republicans are going to end up being the party of health care.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are working on a health care bill of their own while pushing back against the Trump administration.
We will fight that. We'll fight that in the Congress. We'll fight it in the court. And we'll fight it in the court of public opinion, as I'm fond of saying.
Speaker Pelosi is going to force Republicans to get on the record. She announced a vote for next week on a resolution condemning what she calls the Trump administration's legal assault on health care. The speaker said the American people deserve to see exactly where their representatives stand. Rick?
Ray Bogan reporting. Attorney General William Barr tells congressional leaders the Mueller report could be sent to lawmakers by mid-April. He says the Justice Department is now redacting sensitive information from the nearly 400-page report. But Democrats are standing by their deadline of this coming Tuesday for its release. President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, says the full report will not offer anything incriminating.
Democrats are making absolute fools out of themselves. I mean, the report is as clear as it can be, exoneration. I was a prosecutor for 18 years. I've never seen a letter that clear. Usually it's hedged. We can't quite reach the result where we have probable cause to get an indictment, all these other things. Or we can't prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Exoneration.
David Spunt has the latest from Washington. David?
Hey, Rick, good evening. Well, listen, the clock is ticking. Attorney General Barr says he is working as quickly as possible to get this report out. But as you mentioned, nearly 400 pages. Barr believes there will be some redactions to cover sensitive information. Barr says it will be sent to Congress by mid-April. However, Democrats are furious. They want it by April 2nd. Rick, that is just a few days of this coming Tuesday. House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler standing firm on that April 2nd date. Earlier today, Democrat Eric Swalwell got into this heated exchange with Neil Cavuto about the Mueller report.
I'm not going to apologize for loving this country and being someone who benefited from free markets,
no,
free
but that
ideas,
wasn't my question, sir. My question was
dream. So
whether you called the president. I understand that, but you essentially called the president a foreign agent of the Russians, and I'm wondering, there's a report out that seems to disavow that.
Have you read the report?
No, but neither of you, right?
President Trump says he wants to get the report out as soon as possible. Democrats, they mean by this Tuesday. Well, the president's attorney says just not possible.
It's ridiculous to say to the American people, Barr is delaying because he wants to delay. He's delaying because it is very difficult. I don't know if it's 200 pages, 300,
400 pages,
okay.
Whatever.
Very difficult to put out 400 pages with all the legal restrictions and not violate something.
Barr says that he would like to testify the first few days of May before both the House and the Senate, answer any questions that members of Congress may have. Democrats have said they'll think about that date. Meanwhile, Robert Mueller, the man who actually prepared this report, so many want to hear from him. It's possible he may voluntarily come before Congress or he could be subpoenaed. Nothing on the schedule yet, Rick, but he's the man that people want to hear from on Capitol Hill.
Yeah,
Rick?
Just when you thought it was over, David Spunt, it is nowhere near over. Of course, there are many more lingering questions about the Mueller report and where Washington goes from here. So John Bussey, associate editor of the Wall Street Journal, will share his thoughts in just a few minutes. Tens of thousands of Palestinians rallying in the Gaza Strip today, and at least 4, we're told now, were killed in these clashes. We'll be live in Gaza with the latest. Plus, a new report identifying a potential cause of that deadly Ethiopian Airlines crash. We'll tell you what might be to blame coming up next.
In many ways, they did drop the ball, both in the design and the training, and the FAA didn't catch it.
We have breaking developments in the Middle East as clashes flare again in the Gaza Strip. Palestinian protesters marking a full year of demonstrations along the Israeli border, and things are heating up yet again. Trey Yingst is reporting from inside Gaza City. Trey?
Rick, just minutes ago, we got word from the Israeli Defense Forces that 5 rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip into southern Israel. This is the first round of rocket fire in days after what appeared like progress in ceasefire negotiations. Here's a look at what led up to the news we're getting in just now.
Gunfire rings out in Gaza City as a funeral gets underway. Early this morning, a Palestinian was shot in the head at a location where Gazans were throwing IEDs towards Israeli troops. He was the first of 4 fatalities to occur throughout the day.
Hundreds of Palestinians are marching through the streets of Gaza City with the body of 20-year-old Mohammed Said. He was shot by an Israeli sniper along the border today and killed. They're taking him to hospital right now. You can see the gunfire inside Gaza City as thousands prepare for demonstrations today along the Israel-Gaza border.
Those who attended the 40,000-person protest on Saturday did indeed prepare. Some brought explosives and rocks that were thrown at Israeli troops, who they view as an executive arm of the Israeli government, who are responsible for the blockade on Gaza.
Look at the sniper of occupation killed the human and the women and the youth. And there is very crimes. Okay, let's hear voice.
Despite the clashes at the border fence, leadership of Hamas worked to contain the demonstrations to allow for ongoing Egyptian ceasefire negotiations. The Egyptians work on agreements between Israel and Gaza and saw the protests as a hurdle to move forward in addressing humanitarian needs. When the sun set, the Israeli Defense Forces praised Hamas for showing restraint and keeping the situation from escalating. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu took the opportunity to credit Israeli troops for the de-escalation. Hamas officials believe the one-year anniversary of the marches aimed at improving life for Gazans were successful.
This huge number of peaceful people from all Palestinian social categories and political affiliations gathering here peacefully send a strong message for the Israelis that what we are calling for is only dignified and free life. And we are not interested in any escalation.
With no agreement reached and tensions still high, there is not yet a solution for the conflict between Israel and Gaza. Officials here say the border marches will continue for a second year.
The small amount of progress made today may have just been thrown out the window with those 5 rocket launches from Gaza into southern Israel. The region now waits to see how the Israeli military will respond. Rick?
Trey Ying's done a very challenging assignment there in Gaza. Trey, thank you. Maybe the 4th time is the charm. British Prime Minister Theresa May will reportedly bring her Brexit proposal back to Parliament yet again. This one day after Parliament rejected her deal with the European Union for a 3rd time. The margin of defeat has grown smaller with each vote, but Parliament must reach a deal by an April 12th deadline or risk crashing out of the EU, which could have devastating impacts on the country's economy. Pope Francis has announced a new law making it mandatory for Vatican officials around the world to report sexual abuse allegations or face possible jail time. Victims and their families will also be provided with medical, psychological, and legal assistance and be protected from retaliation from the Catholic Church. The edict goes into effect June 1st and follows February's International Summit of Church Leaders at the Vatican to address the abuse of minors. The Pope says he wants this law to serve as a model for the Roman Catholic Church worldwide. An update now on that deadly Ethiopian Airlines crash. A new report points to a faulty sensor that mistakenly triggered the plane's anti-stall system as a potential cause. Jackie Heinrich is here to explain this. Jackie?
Well, Rick, that anti-stall system is known as the MCAS, and it's been under scrutiny for months. Boeing didn't even tell pilots that it existed until after the Lion Air crash. Pilots were furious. Boeing's preparing an update, and they say this time around they are working with the pilots, but they reiterated that no simulator training is necessary. And that's where aviation experts say not so fast. The 737 MAX was designed to be similar enough to other models that pilots wouldn't need additional certifications. It saved billions of dollars because simulators cost money and training takes time. But aviation experts say pilots absolutely need simulator time, especially with an update to the MCAS.
I think it's imperative that pilots sit in the simulator, sit in the seat, see the different screens in the cockpit setup, how it works. But the response of, hey, don't worry about it, watch the video, is the wrong answer.
Even before the Ethiopian crash, pilots complained about insufficient training and being unfamiliar with the 737 MAX controls. 2 pilots wrote in a federal database, quote, "It shouldn't be this hard to figure out what I'm looking at." And also, the fact that this plane requires such jury rigging to fly is a red flag. But Boeing would be hard-pressed to call for simulator training. Not one of the airlines in the United States even owns a 737 MAX simulator. Boeing said there wasn't a need when the plane came to market. Boeing has not finished the training package and the FAA has not yet approved it. But regulators in other countries are already bucking the FAA, saying they're going to do their own reviews.
I implore the FAA to please go to the international community, to their counterparts in Europe and China and so on, to make sure there's a collective decision that now this aircraft is safe to return to the skies.
Boeing says safety is the top priority. Writing to Fox today, Boeing last week hosted more than 200 airline pilots, technical leaders, and regulators for an informational session as part of our ongoing effort to share more details about our plan for supporting the safe return of the 737 MAX to commercial service. The training package is expected to come down as early as this week.
I mean, they had to do that, right? But it seems like simulator training would be such an obvious need.
And a cost.
Yeah. But they need specific simulators for this specific aircraft, and they don't have them.
Well, that's up in the air. They've said before that because the plane is as similar in model to previous versions that they could kind of get away with it. But now they're calling it into question, the airlines and pilots union, saying that there are enough changes here that maybe it's time to consider training.
I think so. Jackie, thank you. Communities facing a long road to recovery after the devastating flooding across the Midwest. We take a look at the economic toll, plus this.
I'm not going to apologize for loving this country and being someone who benefited from free markets,
no,
free
but that
ideas,
wasn't my question, sir. My question was
so
whether you called the president. I understand that, but you essentially called the president a foreign agent of the Russians, and I'm wondering, there's a report out that seems to disavow that.
Have you read the report?
No, but neither of you, right?
Despite Robert Mueller not finding evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, some Democrats doubling down on those claims. What it means as we await the report's public release.
But I have a lot of confidence in the Attorney General.
President Trump backing Attorney General William Barr's decision to release a redacted version of the Mueller report to the public by mid-April. And the president says the White House doesn't have to see it first. Welcome back to the Fox Report. I'm Rick Leventhal, in for John Scott. We're just past the bottom of the hour. If you're just joining us, lawmakers are anxiously awaiting the details of the investigation as Democrats question the special counsel's decision to defer to the Attorney General on the question of obstruction. Let's bring in John Bussey, associate editor for the Wall Street Journal and a Fox News contributor. Democrats clearly not moving on now after this Mueller report came out and found no evidence of collusion. They're now focusing on the lack of a conclusion on obstruction. Is that fair for Democrats to focus on that one point?
Yeah. So for 2 years, we've been waiting for the Mueller report. We're still waiting for the Mueller report. We are waiting for the report to be in the hands of Republicans and Democrats in Congress for them to evaluate. The Democrats are saying, look, you know, Mr. Barr is the Attorney General, but he's appointed by the president. We can't count on him to judge what's in the report. Mueller specifically did not exonerate the president on the issue of obstruction of justice. He also said he didn't find sufficient evidence to carry forward a prosecution. But where does that leave him, and where does that leave the investigation? That's a big question for Congress at this point.
Well, and we've heard from Republicans who say they want to shift to investigate the investigators, to go back and now look at how this whole thing started and why perhaps people in power wanted Hillary Clinton to win and not President Trump. And maybe that's how this whole thing launched.
Yeah. I mean, the upside of what we know about the Mueller report so far is that there was not collusion, he found, between the president, his campaign, and Russia. Good news for America. The downside is that there is still this ambiguity of the obstruction issue, and there's a delay in getting the report to Congress. There's a discussion of redacting things, and Congress is not going to want that. It's also going to want to get all the underlying testimony and all the underlying evidence that was in the report. That's also something Mr. Barr may not want to give Congress.
Is this just sour grapes, though, John, of people, Democrats who were waiting for the Mueller report to condemn or indict the president, and it didn't? So now they're seizing on the one question mark and not moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a position that Republicans have taken, that this is they're just dragging this out. The downside of this is that not a lot's getting done in Washington. You're coming into the 2020 campaign. A lot of issues are on the table. This may be, in a certain regard, kind of a good thing for the Democrats, that they're not going to have to pursue impeachment. But we don't know that this hasn't been resolved until the question of why Mueller did not specifically decide whether or not there was obstruction. Until that's decided, maybe as soon as the report comes out, it's evident in the data. It's evident in all the evidence that's presented.
Well, one person who's very fired up about this is Rudy Giuliani, who is, of course, the president's attorney. And here's what he had to say.
They create these false impressions for the American people. They're like dishonorable salesmen or something. I mean, they're shysters. I mean, it's ridiculous to say to the American people, Barr is delaying because he wants to delay. He's delaying because it is very difficult. I don't know if it's 200 pages, 300,
400 pages,
okay.
Or whatever.
Very difficult to put out 400 pages with all the legal restrictions and not violate something.
Is it fair to say that if there was evidence of obstruction, that Mueller would have revealed it?
Yeah, maybe. And maybe that's why he decided not to carry forward a prosecution. Maybe it's kind of self-evident now. But in the summary that Barr put forward, he quoted Mueller as saying, I can't carry forward a prosecution, but I also can't exonerate him. This is the president's lawyer. This is the job of Rudy Giuliani to kind of put the toughest spin on it.
Yeah.
Look, this is going to be resolved in a couple of weeks. Barr's going to put forward as much of the report as he feels comfortable. Congress, of course, is not going to be happy with what he has put forward. There'll be desire for more. Maybe there's a subpoena of some of the material. Ken Starr did get a judge to release all the grand jury testimony to Congress. Same thing happened during the Nixon-Watergate period. Maybe that happens as well. Sooner or later, we have the data, and we understand why Mueller decided the way that he did. Not until then do you get a resolution of this fight. And that's the problem with the Mueller report so far, is that it did not put this thing to rest.
Well, there have been a lot of reactions to this, and one of them came from Donald Trump Jr., who wrote an op-ed in Real Clear Politics. He calls the Russiagate conspiracy a clown show, and writes, every American president has to deal with an opposition party, competing special interests, foreign enemies, and Americans who just don't like them. My father is the only one who has also had to deal with a conspiracy by the news media and subversive actors in our law enforcement and intelligence agencies to spread false information about him in a failed attempt to overturn his election. Your reaction to that, sir?
I don't know. He's being a good son, isn't he? Isn't that the kind of son you would want to have? Look, you know, the law's the law. Let's see what the lawyers ultimately decide. What Mueller puts forward, what Barr decides, what all the lawyers in Congress decide to actually focus on this.
But isn't that what this was supposed to be? Didn't the lawyers already decide, and we don't have a decision?
We don't. We don't from Mueller. That's the problem. That's the issue. And I think that gets clarified in the next few weeks.
Okay.
There's a lot of fulmination around this. This begins to die down, hopefully soon. A decision becomes clearer, and the presidential campaign goes forward talking about issues and not about the Mueller report.
And maybe Congress gets on with the business of the American people?
There's a lot of it. Yeah. A lot of it to do.
John Bussey from the Wall Street Journal. John, thank you very much. The Midwest still reeling with widespread devastation after the record flooding there. The damages are estimated at upwards of $3 billion already, and the threat may not be over yet. Meteorologist Adam Klotz is live in the Fox Extreme Weather Center with the forecast. Adam?
Hey there, Rick. Stretching across large portions of the country. Yeah, still spots where there's snow melt up in the upper Midwest, but all of this eventually has to work its way down into the Mississippi, and everything here highlighted in green. Those are flood warnings and watches, so flooding still an issue there. Rick, as we took a look again at these temperatures, it does cool off a little bit Sunday into Monday, but it is spring, so we're going to be bouncing back. The roller coaster of spring is underway.
It's a lot to keep an eye on there. Adam Klotz, thanks very much. Meanwhile, the flooding is having ripple effects across the nation. The devastation could potentially lead to higher gas prices just weeks before the summer driving season. Madeline Rivera has this story.
Waters in the Midwest are starting to recede, giving people the chance to assess the destruction from the floods that inundated the region. But the consequences go beyond the heartland. People across the country could feel the pinch at the pump.
It is going to impact our pocketbooks. It's also going to impact our environment.
The problem lies with the transportation of ethanol, commonly made from corn. It's typically shipped from the Midwest on key rail lines leading to coastal facilities like those in Texas, where it's blended with refinery-made fuel. But several railroad tracks have been damaged from the floods.
They're able to make the ethanol. They just can't get it to the markets. There's about a 15% disruption.
Almost all U.S. gasoline is blended with 10% ethanol, but companies like Union Pacific and BNSF Railway still have outages on major routes like these, and with no specific timeline as to when they'll be back up and running.
There are a handful of ethanol facilities that are temporarily halted or have certainly reduced output.
Valero in the Austin, Texas market, for one, switched to a non-ethanol blended gasoline this week.
We're seeing a direct reflection of the shortage of ethanol in ethanol prices being escalated in the market, in the commodities market.
Still, others say there's no need to be alarmed just yet.
It's our hope that, the ethanol that's in storage in the Gulf Coast region and across the nation is going to be sufficient to tide those markets over until the rail lines get reopened and things get back to more normal operating conditions.
As railroad companies work to restore service, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are...
News. House Representative Dan Shaw says his bill proposal is about keeping the government out of decisions that should be left to consumers and businesses. For John Schulte, owner of Schulte's Fresh Foods in Jefferson City, Missouri, his choice of using plastic has to do with the company's bottom line.
The plastic offers a nice visual for the product. You can see the product better, and if the product looks good and the visibility is good, you're more apt to sell that product, sell a lot of it.
Other businesses, however, are choosing alternatives.
Restaurants like the Barred Owl are getting around using plastics by providing customers with metal straws.
So as more and more places around the country have sort of switched from plastic straws to metal straws, and people have sort of realized the impact that it can have on their environment around them, we felt like it was a good move for us to do.
Right now, states like Hawaii, California, and New Jersey are debating stricter rules on the use of plastics, while cities like Chicago and Boston have gone further to ban single-use plastic bags. That's why opponents of the bill say local jurisdictions should have a say in addressing plastic products in their communities.
This bill does not create a solution. It just kicks the can down the road and is going to make plastic pollution a problem.
If the bill passes, it will go into effect later this year. In Columbia, Missouri, Mitty Hicks, Fox News.
Fans who bought tickets for a Rolling Stones concert can't get no satisfaction after the band cancels its upcoming tour of North America. The reason why, next. And more young athletes are suffering injuries once reserved for professionals.
This most absolutely is a national problem, and it's something that is so much bigger than even one sport.
The Rolling Stones have postponed their upcoming North American tour so Mick Jagger can receive medical treatment. No details on the 75-year-old singer's condition, but the band says he is expected to make a full recovery. Promoters reassuring fans their tickets will be valid for the rescheduled dates. The Stones were set to headline the 50th anniversary of New Orleans Jazz Fest in a month. No word on who, if anyone, could replace them. Mick Jagger's 75. With baseball season now underway, lots of kids across the country are gearing up for the start of Little League. But experts warn of an alarming increase in the number of major injuries among young athletes, which back in the day were typically only suffered by the pros. Brian Kilmeade has this story.
I was 13 years old when I found out I had to have surgery.
Little League, America's most celebrated youth sport. But the game's increasing competitiveness and costly year-round programs are leaving players with injuries that were once only seen in the big leagues.
I am seeing an injury rise in young athletes, and it's getting younger and younger.
One such alarming trend, Tommy John surgery, named after the legendary pitcher Tommy John, a four-time Major League All-Star who in 1974 was the first person to undergo the operation to fix a torn ligament in his elbow.
I was about 11, 12 years old when I first started having arm issues, starting to feel sharp pains. It just kept progressing, and the doctor said I had the tear from overusage with my arm.
And when I found out that David needed surgery, I was shocked. Being so young, maybe he wouldn't be able to use that arm again or play sports again.
Go! Stick it. There it is.
It might be fair to say no one sees these surgeries more than Dr. Tommy John, son of the famous baseball pitcher and a sports chiropractor in San Diego, California, who rehabilitates young injured athletes.
Ready, and go! Go! Seeing my dad's name attached to something that's happening more in kids than it is in professional athletes is making me sick. It's making us sick. The surgery was for a professional. That's where we should see it.
A study found that the biggest age group receiving Tommy John surgeries in the U.S. is 15 to 19-year-olds, with nearly 60% of all surgeries performed falling within that age group. A consequence, experts say, of kids being pushed to their limit, playing year-round and specializing in only one sport.
This most absolutely is a national problem, and it's something that is so much bigger than even one sport. Now we're seeing pediatric ACL surgeries, concussions, Tommy John surgeries, ligament tears, stress fractures, and spines.
The Ayala's hope their ordeal will serve as a warning to parents and coaches who are investing in what's become a billion-dollar industry.
They're playing year-round, nonstop, and so eventually it takes its toll. They're still growing, still young. Let the child get some rest, do different sports. No one's going to scout your kid at 8, 9, 10 years old. Your child's health comes first.
That was Brian Kilmeade reporting. The Milwaukee Brewers have the sausage races. The Washington Nationals have the president's races. See what the San Diego Padres have running around the baseball diamond during the 7th inning stretch. And here's Jesse Waters with a look at what's coming up tonight.